Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Welcome once again to the first annual 2013 Bahamas International Symposium. This year, our focus is composers of African and Afro-Caribbean descent. I'm told that the generic term for the type of music is art music. I learned that last year when this was first introduced to me. I'm not going to say very much. I'm your moderator for today. My name is Mr. Edward Bethel. And without any further ado, let me introduce to you the person who will be bringing the introduction, Dr. Marjorie Brooks-Jones.
Thank you, Eddie. Colleagues, faculty, staff, students, symposium participants, symposium organizers, Mr. Marlon Daniel, music director, Ensemble du Monde, and Dr. Christine Gangelhoff of the college, everyone. I am delighted to welcome you to today's event, the Bahamas International Symposium on the theme Caribbean Art. I'm particularly pleased because those of us at the College of the Bahamas like to regard ourselves as pioneers, if you will, breaking new ground and sharing our talents and scholarship on Caribbean art music with our Caribbean and North American neighbours. The Bahamas may have only a very small landmass, but as today's programme demonstrates, it is very, very large in cultural development and expression. The panels boast an impressive array of musicians, composers, and scholars. To those who have travelled far to be with us today, welcome. Thank you for joining us. Your presence attests to the power of the arts, of music, to traverse physical borders and forge creative international partnerships of diverse cultures and peoples. To those from our Bahamian musical community, again, welcome. The college is thrilled that you have accepted our invitation to take part in this unique event, or as we say in the Bahamas, very unique event. On its behalf, I thank you for all that you have given and continue to give our country, whether in performing, composing, recording, and musicology. One day, the most exquisite of arias will be sung and the most magnificent of compositions be played in your praise. Thank you, everybody, and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Brooks-Jones. Before we start, just a brief word about the this morning's format. This morning's panel is on cultural identity in Bahamian art music. And we have 4 distinguished Bahamian composers. I'll introduce them in a second. Each of which will have 15 minutes to give a short presentation on his or her music. I ask that you reserve questions until everyone has given their presentation, just so that we can keep the panels moving along quickly. So to present, well, let me introduce quickly each of the panelists and then we'll get started. First of all, Mr. Quincy Parker. I'm not going to give you much of his bio. His distinguished bio is in the program. I want to save as much time for him to present. Mr. Chris Justillien, Mrs. Audrey Dean-Wright, and the gentleman at the end, Mr. Cleophas Adderley. Mr. Parker will present first, so I ask you to give him a warm welcome. Mr. Parker?
My name is Quincy Parker. I am the odd duck on this panel. They are extremely accomplished and very, very talented composers with history stretching back decades in some cases. My own history as a composer is relatively brief. I started writing art music in 1998, 1999 maybe. And the reason that I did that was because let's go back in time. as a 13-year-old boy, I met a gentleman named Neil Simonet. If you're from the Bahamas and you're involved in the music scene, you will know Neil as an extraordinary percussionist. Neil has a MIDI studio in his home in Stapleton, and for some reason he let me in and taught me how to produce MIDI records, or MIDI songs, and I became a rap and reggae music producer, which some of you will find strange, but I promise you I was pretty good. They used to call me Daddy Q. But we'll move on from there. Some of you will have heard that before. But at the same time that I was learning to produce in a MIDI studio, I was also a member of the Bahamas National Youth Choir, founded and directed by our illustrious Mr. Adderley on the end here. And it was sort of an awakening for me to different possibilities in music. Because I have a big mouth, and have always had a big mouth, Cleophas Adderley chose to ask me to sing some solos in the National Youth Choir. And singing a solo in the National Youth Choir is a fairly big deal when you're, however old I was. It's a fairly big deal, period, because it's not an easy thing to do. And one day we were sitting around at practice at St. John's, and he probably doesn't remember this, but I do. He was writing a song, Conch Man, Fish Man, and he actually asked the choir to help him write the song, which was, for me, a world-changing sort of an experience. It seems simple. You're writing a song, so you say to the people who are around you, who you know to be creative, help me with this song. What do you think we should say here? Or what about this phrase? What should that say? For me, that was my entry into thinking about myself as a composer, as opposed to a songwriter or a MIDI producer. My wife has never even heard this, so this is news to her too. And then when I decided to go back to school, because I came to COB in 1988 and decided that I would do my father's bidding and major in biochem, because he wanted me to be a doctor or a lawyer. And of course I hated it. And so subsequently never went to class, ever. And after, they chuckle, but I'm serious. Antoinette was here; she could tell you. So after 2 years, it was clear that COB was not the experience that I needed at the time. So I left and went out into the world to have fun and pursue my life. I was a DJ. I was an accounts clerk in a church. I sold clothes. I worked in a bank for a short while. So I did a whole ton of stuff, and finally decided that I would go back to school and get a degree in broadcast journalism. And because I'd started a degree in broadcast journalism at some point during that time. And Suzette said to me, we were dating at the time, but this is how I knew she was the right one. She said to me, like practically on the eve of my going back to school, I'd been accepted at a couple of colleges, decided to go to a Christian school named Oral Roberts University. And I was going to major in broadcast journalism. And Suzette said to me a month before I was supposed to go, you should study music. And when she said that, I said, yes, I shall study music, for this is who I am. And those of you who know me, you know that she was absolutely right. This is exactly what I was supposed to be, and it was like a light turned on in my head. And so I quickly called the school and said, hey, I'd like to switch my intended major and major in classical guitar, having never played classical guitar. Having never played any guitar. So I show up for my audition, and the guy says, okay, Mr. Parker, play me some scales. Sorry, sir, I can't do that. Mr. Parker, all right, play me some arpeggios. Let's get started on that. You can warm up there. I'm sorry, so what's an arpeggio? So he looks at me and he says, Quincy Parker? Yes, sir. You want to major in classical guitar? Yes, sir. Do you play guitar? No, sir. Any kind of guitar? No, sir. But you want to major in classical guitar? Yes, sir. Are you serious? Yes, sir. So he paused for about 30 seconds and just kind of looked at me, and he said, okay. Now, he should have been fired for doing that, because there's no way you're supposed to let somebody like me in. But luckily for him and for me, it turned out that I was talented. No, it wasn't about the money, Dr. Bethel, because I was on scholarship. I had a full academic, well, not a full academic scholarship, but an academic scholarship and some stuff, so it wasn't all about the money. I don't know somebody spoke into his ear. And he said, okay, this is crazy, but we'll let this dude in. And 6 months later, I was playing out as a sideman on his professional gigs. So it turned out that I was a pretty decent guitar player. Having never played guitar, I didn't know that. But, so Suzette was right when she directed me to music. And after a while, I played jazz guitar. And, of course, jazz is all about improvisation. And that led me to composition. So after my first semester, I changed from classical guitar to majoring in composition. And that was kind of when I really found what my calling was as a musician. And for the first 2 years of my degree, I wrote choral music. And as you were walking in and seated, you were listening to things like Jerry Roker and Brown Skin Gal and some of the stuff that Cleophas did with the National Youth Choir. And for the first 2 years of my life as a composer, that's what I was hearing in my head as I was trying to write. So my choral style, and we'll play one of my choral pieces in a little bit, my choral style is very much influenced by Cleophas. He may not know this. He may hate the fact that I've named him as one of my influences when you hear my music, but it's true. And it sort of brings for me this question of influences and heritage and culture into a very fine image, because the question is, does my Bahamianness, is it reflected in my music? Is it reflected in the music that I write? And when you hear the piece that I'm going to play for you first, which is called I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day, the answer to that question, well, I'll leave you to judge. But after we play a little bit of this, I want to talk about what it is to have your culture reflected in your music and what that means, to me anyway. I Heard the Bells on Christmas Day. This is a performance by the Bel Canto Singers, one of them. That's our nod to the classic, and now we change things a bit. Performance practice. Okay, that's good. So the beginning of that piece is kind of nebulous. Then you have a very simple statement of the theme. Then we start to mess around with it a bit and have fun. One of the things that I find fascinating about the question of Bahamian heritage as a composer is that didn't sound anything like calypso or gumbe or jankanu. Again, I don't know that I would say it, quote unquote, sounds Bahamian. But to me, the question of nationality and identity and the way they're reflected in music is a wide open question. Because when you listen to the art music of for example, American composers, many of their greatest compositions borrow from traditions that are far removed from their own. They quote Wolf, who was a German composer, who himself quoted, Oriental sounds from time to time. So this question of national identity and whether it is reflected in your music is, I think, at best, an open proposition. For me, the way I see it, if I wrote it, it's Bahamian. Because I'm a Bahamian. And whatever I write, by virtue of the fact that I wrote it, is Bahamian.
I think that it actually turned out to be very, very key that Quincy presented first, because he brought out one of the themes that I think certainly in this morning session we're going to hear throughout, and that is the idea of influences on individuals' music. So keep that file folder, that one, and when questions come up, we can talk about that some more. Without any further ado, though, Mr. Chris Justillien.
Good morning. My experience is quite different from Quincy's. I'm going to start at the very beginning. I grew up in a little small settlement called Pinnis Point in Grand Bahama, and my dad was a Baptist minister that immigrated to the Bahamas in the 50s from Haiti. And that had a profound, growing up in that kind of setting, in a small environment where there were only just a few houses in the yard and a mixed culture. We had some folks from Jamaica living right on side of us, the Penders and the Coopers right up the street. So it was a unique blend of people. Now, what you have to, just to put things in context, before independence, I believe for the most part, anyone who was a Negro in the Bahamas were regarded the same. There was no difference between us. Not until 73 that we started to really take note of the real differences between all of us. I can recall eating, with the neighbors across the road. And, at that time in the Bahamas, everybody disciplined everybody. It was that kind of atmosphere. We all learned from each other. We all went to school together. We walked from school together. It was a wonderful time. Now, being involved in church, there was an organ in the church, one of these old pump organs that you have to pedal and play at the same time. Now, that was a real balancing act. Now, my dad used to have real problems keeping me out of that church. In fact, if I had to break the window to get in, I get into that organ just to make some noise. And then along came my brother when I was about maybe 4 or 5 years old with this guitar. Never seen this instrument before. And it just fascinated me, the sounds and the chords and things that you could do out of this instrument. Now, I particularly gravitated to the guitar early on because, to be quite honest with you, all the girls liked the guitar. So when I took the guitar to school, man, I was the rock star. So that encouraged me to learn quite a bit about the guitar. One of the major turning points in my life was when I went to school in the United States. At the age of 12, my parents sought to send us off to school in the States because they figured that we would get a better education at that time. I ended up at Miami Edison Junior High School and subsequently to the Senior High School, where I saw bands for the first time. It was absolutely fascinating. This was like a journey. If I had to paint the entire journey to you from then to now, you would really, really say, "Wow, what a travel plan this was." At Miami Edison, I remember the band director asked me for the first time, "What instrument would you like to play?" I said, "I'd like to play the trumpet," because growing up in a small settlement like Pinnis Point, and going to church, the only instrument you read about in the Bible is Gabriel, blow your what? Trumpet. They had nothing about no baritone or no saxophone or no euphonium or no sousaphone, those clarinet and flute. I ain't never hear about them things in the Bible. So I wanted to play the trumpet. Unfortunately, he just gave away the last trumpet. And he said, well, young man, we don't have any more trumpets. You're going to have to play the euphonium. And I said, okay. Now, I'm 12. And, I'm pretty big now, but at the age of 12, I was a skinny, he used to call me spaghetti. I was a little small fella. And this guy went in the instrument room, pulled out this big rusty horn. I mean, this horn looked like ain't no one bothered with it for about 120 years. So I'm stuck with this big horn. It's almost as big as me. And, they insist that you practice 4 hours a day. I have to take this on the bus every single day. So I was so determined to be good at this instrument, I did what I had to do. Now, while at the junior high school, the marching band from the senior high school used to march past the junior high school every afternoon. And man, that was like, I want to be in that. That opened some doors for me. As soon as I went to the senior high school, I auditioned for the band, made it in, and I made it in the second chair. And there were about 5 or 6 baritone players. And to make it in from the junior high school to second chair is pretty impressive. So that would tell you how much work I had put into my instrument in grade 7 and 8. While I was at the senior high school, after I'm going to go real fast through this, so you just get a glimpse of how I end up here. In grade 10, a friend of my mother's worked at I believe the name of the hotel was the Oceanus Hotel, I'm not sure, in Freeport. It's a hotel in Lucaya. He went up in the attic of the hotel and found a violin. And he took it to my mom and said, listen, I know your son likes music, give this instrument to him. So she sent it to Miami to me. The instrument was not in working condition when she sent it to me. I took the violin to the orchestra director at the senior high school. It was missing, I believe, a bridge, a peg, and needed to be restringed and so on. When I took the instrument to the gentleman, his name was Joseph Mezaros, a gentleman from Russia. Or Czechoslovakia, I can't remember, one of those European areas. He took the instrument, had it repaired for me, and gave it to me and said, listen, would you like to join the orchestra? I said, sure. So I joined the school orchestra. After 1 year of playing in the school's orchestra, I auditioned for the Dade County Honors Orchestra, which they have these type of honors band all over the United States, where counties have auditions and they select the best out of all the students that audition. It was amazing that I made the honors orchestra, and I was the first student at the Miami Edison Senior High School to make that orchestra in over 50 years. So it was a big deal for the school, and it was a big deal for me because I had only been playing 1 year. I remember sitting in that orchestra the first day, and they had this gentleman that I never forget him. His name was Colonel Gabriel. He was from one of the military services, and he was the conductor for the band. And he came onto the podium with his baton, and we all got the music beforehand and practiced and everything. And this is my first time. Remember, this is a little fella coming from Penless Point now. You have an orchestra, almost 100 or so persons. I'm sitting in the second violin section, and he raised the baton, and we're getting ready to play the first piece. As soon as that baton comes down, boom, I hear this sound that I've never heard before. I literally froze up. I couldn't play because it was so beautiful. The sound was so amazing, and I just had to stop and look around. And I could remember that time just thinking, how did you get here? It was just unbelievable. So that prompted me to get into just listening to all types of music. My repertoire of things that I enjoy goes from jazz to classical to marching band. I've had influences. I'm influenced by people like John Philip Sousa, Henry Fillmore, some of the great march writers in marching band music. I'm influenced by all of the great classical composers that write all the overtures and the concertos and all that kind of stuff. I'm influenced by jazz musicians from being around the jazz band at Edison. So all of these things help to shape my repertoire of things that I like, to shape my character in a lot of ways. One of the things that I believe that helped me a lot in being accepting of all of this music is the fact that being from two cultures, you get a unique perspective of what the transportation of African slaves to this new world, what effect it really has on us. Because I'm hearing songs in church in Creole, and I'm hearing them when I go to First Baptist Church in English. And I'm thinking to myself, these are the same songs. How did this happen? I'm hearing songs when if I travel to Europe or the rest of the Caribbean, I'm seeing things that connect us all. And it's pretty fascinating. We're not that far apart. This is a very, very small world. And a lot of the traditions, either they were spread by missionaries or they came from one place, or a combination of the two. And I believe that is where my music, the music that I write, that's what tie everything that I do together. I draw from both cultures. I draw from the training that I've had. I draw from my own personal experiences. And it's a wonderful tapestry of music and notes and things that I'm combining that make me who I am. I'm going to play just a little bit of some pieces here just to give you an idea. Most of you who know me know that I'm heavily involved in John Canoe, and I'm really involved in John Canoe for one reason and one reason only. Not that it's the easiest thing in the world, because it's very, very hard. It takes a lot of discipline if you want to do it right. It takes a lot of time and it's a lot of hard work. I'm also heavily involved with working with young people. I like to see when that bulb just light up, when they get it, when they get a piece of music or something that they didn't like or something that they didn't understand, and all of a sudden, boom, I got it. That's amazing to me. The first one I'm going to play for you is just a little bit of the one that's called 100 Days, I believe, Day 1. About last year, being in this environment in the Bahamas is very frustrating, to be quite honest with you, as a composer, because the radio station is really constantly blowing a lot of negative stuff at you and really one steady diet of a particular kind of music. So it does not lend itself to being creative. So you have to think outside of the box and you have to listen outside of the country to see what's going on. I challenged myself about 2 years ago to write 100 songs in 100 days. And this is the first song that I wrote out of those 100 songs. And I accomplished that, and I continue to write. This was the first one, and I called it Day 1. And I just named them the day that I wrote them on. Okay. Another piece that I'm going to play for you, I had the opportunity of working with Madam Nicolette Bethel a few years ago on the Shakespeare in Paradise project. And this was a really good experience for me because it forced me to write for an entire production for singers, and to put it into a kind of a Bahamian context in some cases. A lot of the pieces were very short, and it challenged me to just think outside of the box, and everything had to have a unique sound based on the scenes that they were on. The first one I'm going to play for you, can we play Phantom? And most of these had a singer, but this is just the music. This is just the music to back it up. So to me, music is the same as painting. I'm painting with a sound. You know, I take the piano and I play a combination of notes that's supposed to make you feel something. And those of us who learn to do this well, we know exactly which combination of notes. I always picture myself as a mad scientist. When I go into my studio to write, I'm like I have on my white long cloak, my jacket, and I have these tubes with smoke coming out of it. That's how I see myself. And depending on what I pour into this, is going to go boom, or it's going to go shh, and some stuff is going to happen. And that is how I want to affect my audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Justillien. I'm going to move straight right along to Mrs. Audrey Dean-Wright. Welcome.
I was born in the culturally rich area of Baintown, near to Kanta Bata. I don't know if anybody has heard that word before. Kanta Bata and Baintown was where slaves settled after emancipation. Kanta Bata is now known as Black Village. During my childhood, daughters and sons of slaves, older people, still lived in that area. My lullabies were actually the sound of goatskin drums on a Saturday night as they gathered around a bonfire to celebrate their heritage from Africa. The jumping dance was one of those, and the fire dance. I couldn't go to those. My mother was a Christian, but I certainly could hear it or peep through the window. So hence, a great influence on my life. Another lullaby that I had was my Uncle Beecham Coakley. He was a marvelous musician, and the sound of his 6-string double bass was something I heard all the time. So they're my earliest memories of music. And then, of course, once my mother found out that I had a gift for music, she sent me to the best there was, which would have been Clement Bethel, who is my mentor, and Hilda Barrett, my Aunt Hilda, who had a great influence on me. She never really taught me, but she influenced me greatly. I believe that my compositions are inspiration from God, first of all. But besides that, my greatest inspiration is born out of my childhood and my environment. However, there are other things that impact what I have done, my travels. I've lived in different countries. I went to the Manhattan School of Music, so I was in the midst of culture and worked with the professors from the Juilliard, because we share professors, and so I had a lot of exposure. So my compositions are me. I do not sit and think I am going today to write. It just happens. I start writing, and I close myself away, and it flows. So I'm not one of the long-winded ones. I need several weeks to complete a composition. That's just the way it is for me. I'm going to go right into my composition. I found out something when I was asked to do this, that in a lot of my music, the goatskin drum that was so important in terms of hearing in my childhood, there seemed to be those rhythms in many of my compositions. And it is an awakening for me today, and I thank Christine for asking me, and I'm going to look into it more deeply. So we're going to look at one of my choral pieces, Rise Up Children, Give Thanks. It's sung by the SEAC Music Festival, a combination of historically black university choirs. I'm conducting them. In that you will hear the syncopation that is so important in Bahamian music. You'll hear some call and response between voices, and you will also hear counter rhythms and a very small fugal section. Rise Up Children, Give Thanks.
Rise up, children, give thanks to the Lord, and tell him how you feel. Rise up, children, give thanks to the Lord, and tell him how you feel. Rise up, children, rise. Rise up, children, rise. He has done great things for us, wherefore we are glad. Yeah.
Thank you. So you see in that composition, you can hear some of the musical devices that are used in Bahamian music. And of course, storytelling, such an important part of our culture, storytelling. Children years ago waited for Grammys to tell them stories, and one of the main stories was Spirit, the ghost story. You didn't want to go to bed, but you still wanted to hear the story. Started writing a lot of our folk-like pieces that tells a story because of the National Children's Choir. I'm co-director and co-founder of that choir. And many times we'd be looking for folk music, but the sexual connotation sometime in the music was not suitable for the children, and hence my writing of some of our folk music styles. And Spirit Song is actually one of them. But again, in that, in the chorus of that, you will hear that some of our drumming in there also in the chorus. Now, Spirit Song is sung by one of my most famous sopranos in the whole world, Joanne Callender, and she's accompanied by a very, very wonderful pianist, Lee Callender, her husband. Then I have my calm moments, and I write things like Waltz of the Flamingo, and it's taken from a book that I will be publishing very, very shortly with a tape with a flautist playing all of the pieces. So that's coming up very shortly. It's not nostalgic because I remember going to Adastra Garden as a child and seeing the flamingos dance. I'd never seen anything like that in my life. They actually dance. So hence we have Waltz of the Flamingo. The first section is a stately waltz, and then when they take flight, I make use of 16th notes to show when the flamingos take flight. Thank you. Performed by Jill Austin. Thank you. That's the tapestry of my music. That's me. Thank you so much.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really shocked that I influenced Quincy Parker to write music.
What?
Yeah. I've had a lot of influences in my music and to write music myself. I came from a very musical family, so I was taught piano at the age of 7 by my aunt. My mother, who was a very well-known church organist, didn't really have time to teach us well. With 9 children, you can understand. So our sister taught us all the piano. Gladys Bailey taught me the pipe organ. Well, they were my first lessons on those instruments from my family members. And then, of course, I went on to high school and came across a wonderful lady by the name of Marion St. George. We called her Mickey. She was the music teacher at the government high school. And she laid a very strong and foundation that has set me really up in music for the rest of my life. Some of the things we did in that class were college level work. It was just me and her by the time it was A level, so she was able to pour out into me literally her musical self. And I started writing under her influence. My first work, actually, I wrote, well, I thought it was a serious work at the age of 14. It was called The Sleeping Dog. Oh, Lord, I hide that music now. And I continue to write. Just keep on writing, it's going to get better. I said, well, it can't get worse than this. And you will discover a style. And so I continued to write. And by the time I reached 5th form, I was writing for the school choir. And by the time I did A levels, of course, I was writing everything from string quartets to orchestral parts, you name it. So she gave me a really strong foundation. And then at the age of 17, I joined the Nassau Renaissance Singers, which was conducted by the late E. Clement Bethel. And he was a very strong influence on my musical life. He also taught me piano. And he really encouraged me to write even more and to also not forget our national essence as Bahamians. And at that time, the country was moving towards independence. So, and he also taught me piano. And I happened to hear the theme for his Sammy Swain. I didn't know Clement. Well, I wasn't his student at the time. I just heard it. And years later, after I was in his choir and in high school doing A levels, I happened to whisper to him, you know, I wrote some piano variations on your theme, because I was afraid to tell him. And he said, what? Oh, come on, come play it for us. And I'm sitting there at the piano, nervous as hell, excuse me, playing these piano variations that were very, very difficult. I don't know what I was thinking. But anyway, I just poured out my heart in this music, and he really loved that music. And I was so happy that later on in life, Lee Callender gave the first performance. And then Dr. Paul Shaw, who is in the audience, he also took up the piece and has performed it internationally and also recorded it. So I'm very delighted about that. When I write music, of course, I write music that's either classical or folk or a combination of both. And certainly in the classical music, I employ the European vocabulary of music, and you music students, I'm sure you understand what I'm talking about when I talk about that. Various types of scales, diatonic, etc., and devices and forms, and certainly when I started writing music, I was greatly in love with the fugue. I was taking organ lessons in the cathedral. So everything was a fugue, a fugue, a fugue. So I use a lot of those devices, and the passacaglia, how could I forget that? So I use these devices, but I also employ our folk tunes, even our folk tales. Of course, our folk rhythms, which are largely Afro-Caribbean rhythms. And instrumentation, of course. And of course, our harmonies. You find, for instance, in our rake and scrape music, and you know, our rake and scrape music is music that comes from the quadrille, and the quadrille was a European art form. And of course, here we blended it with our rhythms and our various instruments, so that the form, the style of music is now completely different, and we can really say that it's our own. So much so that we don't call it quadrille music anymore, we call it rake and scrape music. And in that music we use the accordion and the saw that's scraped. And so I use these instrumentations in my music. Sometimes I don't use them at all. I try to hint at them in the coloring of my music. For instance, there's a section of the Mass that I wrote where the harmonies are very close, and they're almost crescendo, decrescendo, crescendo, decrescendo. And when Clement Bethel first heard that, he said, "Oh my God, that sounds just like the accordion." And I said, "You know what? You're right." I was sort of doing these things and imitating them subconsciously, because these are the sounds I hear around me with Bahamian folk musicians and folk artists. And then, of course, there are the nuances of the Bahamas and different things that strike you. With one of my songs that was sung last night, Nassau Harbor, sung by Joanne Callender, and I tried to give the contrast between sailing into a very smooth. Oh, and Dr. Chrissy Lee, I must say this on the piano. Thank you very much, Chrissy. I tried to give the contrast of smooth sailing into the harbor, but the idea isn't this isn't any harbor, so the bass has syncopation, while the upper part has the undulating water and the idea of a ship just sailing along very smoothly. And then all of a sudden it goes into this very rhythmic section of the straw market. And then the language even changes. So I make use of language as well. And the singer sings in dialect. That woman in the market, child, she talking about, you thief my customer. You too bigotty. You know, and all of that is to try to use the nuances and pull in as many elements of the Bahamas as I could. And of course I extend that further to the Caribbean in the music. And then in some of my music, also in that song and in some of the other songs, you will hear, I hope you hear, sounds that are the influences of the Black experience, and to be more specific, for instance, jazz. And I will use jazz chords and again syncopation. And again, someone mentioned to me, sometimes some sections of your music sounds like Gershwin. I said, well, that's not a bad thing. Gershwin was writing about the Black experience in the United States, and I'm essentially trying to capture the Black experience here and elsewhere and inject it into my music, and like I said, with the classical music while employing the European vocabulary music at the same time. So in classical realm, I've written music for solo voice solo voice and piano, solo voice and drum. There's a piece I wrote called I Remember Grandma. And there's a story I heard while traveling on our family islands. This lady was saying how she can really remember her grandma. I don't know whether this was a great grandmother or whatever. And this lady is a descendant, very close descendant of a slave, and that she still wore her nose ring in her nose. And I thought, my God, I don't know if this woman making this up, but I like this, I'm running with this. But it really touched me. And so I wrote a song about that. I remember Grandma and how she had this nose ring and how old she was. And I said, I cannot employ any European instruments in this piece at all. And it was just voice and drum. Voice and drum. And then there is my choral music. Now, the choral music, those of you who had the opportunity to come to the concert last night, you would have heard a bit of one of my arrangements of a Bahamian folk tune, Big Bunch, a Little Bunch. Unfortunately, a lot of these things are dying out because the children don't sing them anymore. They don't play the ring games anymore. Big Bunch, a Little Bunch is a very playful and very quick Bahamian folk song. I've also done an arrangement of 1 or 20. We played that at school as kids, but the children here don't seem to play it anymore. There is I went down the road with my bucket on my head. There's so many of them. In fact, I have a work that I call the Carrie Classics, and it was my idea of well, I was thinking I was coining a term for Caribbean classical music. So I call it the Carrie Classics. And what that work is some 17 Bahamian folk songs arranged for chorus, in some cases double chorus, also with soprano and other soloists in it, drums, and the Carrie Classics was the whole idea was to try and preserve as many of our ring plays and well, it's really ring plays, not even folk tunes. It's ring plays, children's games as possible. Hence the Carrie Classics. But also in choral music, I have I've been writing music in the folk style for the National Youth Choir. And don't mind them saying I'm the oldest person up here. But I've been writing music, and I will say for the youth choir from we first started, which is 30 years ago. And a lot of this material, I either, again, use folk songs and I arrange them, or I write music in the style of the folk songs. Again, trying to capture the essence of Bahamian life. And one of those pieces is called The Jitney. And the whole idea is the kids on stage sing and they act like they're jitney trying to get where they have to go. And it's when this jitney come and we late for work. Girl, things are hard now. Must you gotta wait till the rapture come for one broke down bus. If today wasn't Friday, I'd call in sick. But man, I so full, because today is payday. and then it goes on and it talks about how bad the jitney driver driving, and he got everybody going this way and that way, and then at the end of it, it talks about how the person got on the wrong bus. And all the time they cussing out the driver. And there are many songs of that nature that I write about the nature of things going on here in the Bahamas from a folk standpoint. But we're going to listen to a bit of the Mass, which is Misa Carib. I started writing this mass when I was in high school at Government High, and finished it after I graduated. This segment is being performed by the National Youth Choir, but the first performance of the Mass was by the Nassau Renaissance Singers, and at that time it was conducted by Clement Wright.
Hi, I'm Anne-Marie Offer, and I'd like to say hello and invite you to come watch Something to Offer, and it's my show. It's on Saturday nights on Channel 56 for Time Warner and 83 for RCN. It's all about people going after their dreams. We all have something to offer, so come watch the show, and then maybe you can share what you have to offer.